gentlemen, welcome to Wrestling and Everything, Coast to Coast, with your host, Buddy Sotello, Esquire, and Evan Ginzburg. Evan, would you like to introduce our guest for tonight?
Absolutely. We have two wrestling historians, wrestling journalists, lifelong wrestling fans. All the way from Massachusetts, we have my buddy Julian Rich, who was weaned on Capital Wrestling. And we have Scott Wilson from Long Island, who was weaned on WWF. And we went to many of the same Nassau Coliseum epic shows. So welcome, fellas. How are you tonight?
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. This is going to be a lot of fun, I'm sure.
It always is.
Sure will. And Julian, why don't we start with you? Tell us about the early days watching Capital Wrestling, because I started watching wrestling in '72, so you predate me.
Oh, yeah. I've got a good 10 years plus on you. I would say it was the late 50s, early 60s. I was in 7th, 8th grade. One of the fellow classmates convinced me to watch the local wrestling show in Washington, D.C., hosted by Ray Morgan. And the people that really made me, I don't know, I guess you could say a mark of sorts, Buddy Rogers, Gorgeous George, the Bastine brothers, the Graham brothers, Haystacks Calhoun, Abe Jacobs. Abe Jacobs, of course, with a Star of David on his trunks. And as a Jew, this was like an amazing thing.
Yeah.
He inspired me to.
Mark Lewin was Jewish too.
Right. Yeah, there was a handful of people. Anyway, I was taken. It was not just being able to look at these people as comic book characters, but it was also a way of kind of harnessing my adolescent energy. I wasn't doing well with the girls, so instead I put it into watching wrestling and attempting drop kicks at gym class with my buddies, and eventually you found other people that were sort of in the same boat. But I was especially taken by a match. The first time I went to a wrestling match, it was an outdoor match at Griffith Stadium, which was the old Washington Senators Park. And it was something I'd never seen before, something I'd never experienced before. You know, I'd been to some baseball games, and that was my exposure to sports. But this was like nothing that I've ever seen, because it was not just athleticism, but it was also art and emotion and working the crowd. And this outdoor program that I went to featured a match between Killer Kowalski and Johnny Valentine. And they went for an hour draw, and they carried them both out on stretchers.
Wow.
And I'll never forget this, because as they were carrying them out on stretchers, the people that were carrying them carried them so they were close enough to each other so that
they could still fight.
One reached the other and knocked them off the stretcher. And there was almost a riot. Wow. And my brother and I, who had convinced my father, who didn't really appreciate this the way we did, we had convinced my father to take us to this show. Anyway, the crowd went nuts. The natives became restless. Everybody's running towards the ring as Kowalski and Valentine are hitting each other from the stretchers. I mean, this was absolutely an amazing experience. And my father says, I think we'd better go. People are kind of getting a little agitated. My brother's saying, no, this is exciting. This is fun. Anyway, that was just one of the feature matches. And on the same card were a whole bunch of others from that era, Anthony Naraka and Argentina Zuma and Mark Lewin and Don Curtis and the Bastine brothers and Haystacks Calhoun, and people that to me had not just charisma, but it was like they were unrehearsed actors who put an emotion that captured the crowd. Unlike today, which is clearly professional acting and rehearsed and scripted and lacking of emotion. So it just hit me in a way that I have. I hope I'm conveying my enthusiasm and interest and how it really captured me.
There you go. And Scott, what was your first match?
The first thing I had seen was my mother's father used to talk about the old days in Chicago to me, about Vern Gagne and the Dumont Network when it was on, Gorgeous George, naturally, all that. We had Channel 67 was a UHF channel. This is Championship Wrestling, around 1972, 73. First thing I saw was Lou Albano rip the stairs off the in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Ripped the stairs off with a cast on his hand and attack Jay Strombo when he was managing Mike McCord, who later on became Austin Idol. You know, that was my introduction to that. And then that led to every Tuesday night watching championship wrestling from Florida with Gordon Soley with my grandfather. And then every Wednesday night we got it on Channel 41 from the Olympic Auditorium where we saw young Roddy Piper and our favorite John Tolis and Pampero Firpo and the Hollywood Blondes and endless. 1975 was a beautiful year, yeah. So
and Gordman and Goliath too.
Well, yeah, you know, you can go on and on all day about that pool of talent they had there. I just seen Jimmy Leonard announce the matches was something in and of itself, you know. I know Red Shoes Dugan is the referee, you know, so. And this,
what was the first live match you went to, Scott?
Had to be one at the Nassau Coliseum. We used to have to beg my father when he'd come home from work. He owned a gas station in Queens, and he would be tired, and sometimes he would take us, and sometimes he'd be too tired. I saw Nikolai, who became a dear friend later in life, and Johnny, who became a dear friend later in life, in 1974-75. Nikolai had wrestled Bruno that night. And after the matches, my father and I was 13 years old. We went outside, and Bruno was signing autographs outside. And to this very day, 47, 48 years later, however long it was, I was struck by seeing Bruno, the size of his upper body. He was bursting out of a sport coat. It was unbelievable to see someone that big as a young boy. He was just huge. The upper body was the shoulders, the back, and the arms. He was the coat looked like it couldn't contain him. It wanted to rip off his body. That's how big he was, you know. And then we had the Valiant brothers would come out to the area, watch the matches from the tunnel. Jimmy wouldn't talk to you. Johnny wouldn't talk to you. I took a picture of Johnny, 1974, 75, and showed it to him later in life. And we became close. And I said, "You remember that night? You wouldn't talk to me. Now we're best friends, or very, very close friends now." And he used to laugh at that, you know. So I was there. I was there the night you were there. We talked about the match with Koloff and Dusty Rhodes. It was like 79 or something, where they had us standing on their seats. The match was so good.
Yeah.
Koloff. Then I remember Andre the Giant in 75. He backdropped Butcher Bashan. We were sitting in the second row, and you thought the ring was going to collapse. Those are memories that stay with me, you know. So,
yeah. My experience after Washington was to move to North Jersey, got married, and I developed some friendships, and we convinced ourselves to go to Madison Square Garden and see Bruno. He wrestled Spiros Arion. In those days, as I'm sure you're aware, there was usually 3 matches, one month after the other. And it would be a program where someone would come in from another territory and they'd work with Bruno. And it was just something that had, it sold out the garden. And Evan, you can relate to this. It's 1975, and it was a typical Madison Square Garden card. Again, Bruno versus Spiros Arion. And Bruno walked in the ring, and I will never forget to this day that the building shook. And I'm not saying that. Mm-hmm. And again, Evan, we've talked about this. There was no one that got the reaction like Bruno. But there was a lot of those people from that era up until what I call the cable area that got these incredible pops from the crowd. And of course, Bruno was kind of the king of that. There was no one like Bruno Sammartino, and he is one of the people on my Mount Everest for sure. And I bet that everyone here and many of the people watching or listening would agree with that. He was special, and he was huge, and he was more than just a cartoon character. He conveyed a certain warmth and emotion. When Vince McMahon would say to him, "Now talk to your fellow countrymen in Italian," you didn't have to be Italian to feel what he was speaking about, because he had a way of just capturing people, and it was very special and something that I can't forget. That's the art.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I think last week we had the 40th anniversary of when Bruno lost the title to Ivan Koloff.
No,
Isn't
it's
that
50 years.
50 years? Sorry, 50 years.
Yeah.
Sorry, 40 seems like 50. 40 is the new 50 these
There's
days.
There was a fella on Facebook that has Koloff's boot from that match. I think he got it gilded in gold, like you would gild your baby shoes in gold. He has the boot Koloff wore in the ring that night. If you can imagine how he got something like that, I don't know, but he did. I saw the picture of it. It's unbelievable to see it. That's remembered as one of the classic matches of all time. You know,
Absolutely.
that match. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember Manhattan Cable televised some of the matches to New Jersey, and I developed a friendship with a guy who was able to get Manhattan Cable, and he was sort of a wrestling fan, but became more of a wrestling fan when I convinced him to invite me over so we could watch the matches from the Garden. And I remember seeing Bruno and Koloff, and it was like an experience just to be able to watch those two.
Yeah, people don't understand. Bruno and Koloff would walk down the aisle. They just have on a pair of black tights, and the building literally would shake. That's the charisma, the credibility. Back then, the title meant something. Koloff had beaten Bruno prior. He comes back in 75, and it meant everything. And these guys, the Valiant brothers and Albano and Nikolai, it's like the building literally shook. There were 22,000 people there. And it was an amazing experience at the Garden.
One of the big differences, though, Evan, was that the streets of New York were a little bit safer in the pre-cable days because you had such a cast of characters in the audience. The time I went to Madison Square Garden, there was a stabbing behind us. There were fights throughout the crowd. I mean, it was wonderful as long as we didn't get involved in the violence. But it was not exactly what cable has made wrestling today and how it's evolved to the point where it's mainstream and it's a form of entertainment that isn't really to me it lacks the emotion. I like to describe professional wrestling as the last vestige of vaudeville because of the close connection that wrestling has to that era, but how it evolved, to vaudeville, to Gorgeous George, to Buddy Rogers, and I'm sure you all know, Muhammad Ali used to refer to Gorgeous George as having influenced his persona. And I think that comes out in the recent film that you may or may not have seen, One Night in Miami. It features Muhammad Ali, Sam Cooke, Malcolm X, and Jim Brown. Yeah, it's based on a play, but it comes out in there that Muhammad Ali was influenced by Gorgeous George, and it's just something that hopefully people today can understand to some extent. Several months ago, I was visiting my son in Brooklyn, and I put on a match between Bruno and the superstar Billy Graham, another one of the most charismatic wrestlers of that era. And I was so proud that my 40-year-old son got it. He saw how these people were working the crowd. He saw that it wasn't scripted. He saw that there was a lot of improvisation, but there was this natural sort of way in which these people reacted. I mean, today you're bored with perfection and production, and there isn't much flexibility, and you just have to go back to those days and appreciate it in a way in which there are very few things in this day that can be appreciated.
There you go, buddy.
I was thinking, and it's a question that I want to ask each one of you individually, because both of you consider yourselves wrestling historians. Why is wrestling history important? Why is it important that we know these things, that we remember these guys for who they were and what these matches were about? Why is that important to know for the rest of the world?
I think it takes you back to your childhood. It takes you back to the link to my grandfather, who was precious to me to this very moment. My mother, my father. Then later on, his memories, you hold on to all these. Evan and I developed beautiful memories with Nikolai and Johnny Valiant. Evan developed beautiful memories with Killer Kowalski. Very important to know for people to know that they can become personal friends with their boyhood idols and heroes. It's unbelievable. Evan can attest to that with the many people he knows in the business. But myself, I'm the type of person, you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, go to the bathroom, or make coffee, whatever. And I'm thinking about John Tolos in 1975.
Yeah.
Or I'm
Right.
thinking about Baron von Raschke in 1978, or Larry Hennig. I mean, I love Larry Hennig to death. He was another one. I never got to meet him, but I did something about Larry Hennig. I can't. Harley Race, you know. Later on, as the years went by, you met these guys at these conventions. You're able to tell them how much they meant to your life and your childhood, and they love to hear that and everything. Plus, I'm a collector. I collect wrestling memorabilia, so and some of the stuff I have is quite rare, you know. It's just a love in the heart that you spread out to other people. You can't put that in. It's hard to put it into words, you know. But I think when you're young, and we talked about our young experiences with it, it grabbed you, it gets in your blood, never leaves it, you know. That's how passionate we were about this. It was just something that affected you. You can't. It was. We didn't talk about our schoolwork in 1970, but we talked about the Valiant Brothers wore the ring the night before, you know?
Right.
What jackets, what trunks, what they tell Johnny that, you know, and he would laugh and he would say, you know, what we did wasn't about. I said, what are you kidding me, man? You know, the effect you had on our lives and everything, forget about it. We didn't wash our hands for a week after we touched them when they came out to the ring at the Nassau Coliseum. So there's an innate love inside of this. And you spread that love to other people, and that is a history that you remember, and you can collect, and you can do this and do that. But it's important for people to know the history of wrestling, because what you have today is, no disrespect, is nowhere near what we had, what we were blessed with. You know, nowhere near it.
I think Scott hit the nail on the head when he's talking about these are precious memories that you had with your late father or grandfather or uncle or whoever the case may be. My mother went to wrestling in the 50s. My mother loved wrestling too. My mother knew Nikolai. My mother met Nikolai and Johnny and was friends with them, and you know, so it's all connected. And when you look back at your life and you think of some of the greatest nights of your life, it was seeing Bruno and Ivan Koloff, Bruno and Billy Graham, Bruno and Nikolai, etc., so on. Even Roddy Piper. I tell people, Piper, mid-'80s, you know, he would come out. It was absolute pandemonium and chaos.
Mhm.
And then you could breathe again. You could breathe again after it was all over. These are great memories. Great memories.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Roddy Piper, we saw in '76 from the Olympic, was incredible. The Chavo Guerrero feud,
Yeah.
John was involved with that. If you want to see the greatest promos I think I've ever seen, 1982, the beginning with Gary Hart, Roddy Piper, and Kabuki, and Gordon Soley in Georgia. The tapes are on YouTube. Oh my God, what memories! We used to watch it every Saturday night, and from New York here, then I'd go roller skating. But I watched these promos. It takes me back to 1982. It was incredible. The promos. This is where Vince Sr. saw Roddy Piper, and then they decided to bring him in for Piper's Pit, I believe. After that, a couple of years later, that's when that started. But the promos he did in Georgia with Gordon Soley and Gary Hart were unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Scott, I'm glad you mentioned Gordon Soley, because up until the early mid-'70s, my exposure was basically Capital Wrestling and some of the people we've talked about. But there was a show that was like Gordon Soley did. It was like a weekly show that sort of summarized what was going on.
Joe Pedicino had it. Joe Pedicino was on it too. He died.
Yeah. And then there were these people who I'd never really heard of. But when I would go to a newsstand and I would see the wrestling magazines, it kind of complemented and supplemented what I had heard from Gordon Soley on this weekly show.
Yeah.
So my horizons were expanded beyond the early WWF, early Capital Wrestling people, and then I got to know people like the Crusher, Brody. Although Bruiser Brody did spend some time in the WWF. He was one of my all-time favorites, not just because he was an amazing character with tremendous skills. He was also a professional football player, and growing up in Washington, I was a big Redskin fan, and he spent a short time with the Redskins, so that made him even more interesting and attractive to me. But there were just so many people, and as we talk, I think of names like, the original Sheik and Bobo Brazil and the Grand Wizard, Ernie Roth in his early days.
There are books being done on the Sheik and the Grand Wizard, I believe, both of them. Ernie Roth and the Sheik, I believe.
There's an awful lot of wrestling books out there, and
Ernie Roth was very good friends with a singer named Sophie Tucker.
Oh, really? That goes back a long time.
Sophie Tucker was on the Ed Sullivan Show quite a few times. She's a very talented singer, but Ernie had some roots in show business, and Ernie used to help her with her costumes and clothing for the show and get her fabrics and stuff. I read that in Gary Michael Capetta's book. There's not a lot out there on Ernie, but I think I saw a post where a man named Tim Keenan is doing a biography of Ernie now, so that'll be something to look forward to, as much as the book that Brian Solomon's doing on the original Sheik, to give us more insight on what the man was like, behind the character, I guess, because he never broke kayfabe, the Sheik. He never did.
Yeah, arguably the greatest villain of all time.
You'd have to him, Buddy Rogers, Gorgeous George. I mean, I believe starts with the three of those guys there, in that way. But the Sheik knew how to control the crowd. I mean, he really did.
Well, that was what it was all about, working the crowd. And like I was saying before, when I watched this match between Graham and Bruno with my 40-year-old son, and I have two sons. They're 37 and 40. And over the years, we went to a whole bunch of shows. In the post-cable days, we actually went to an opening of a Gold's Gym in Somerville, Massachusetts, not far, Evan, from where we met when you brought Johnny Valentine in and did that show. And he did his one-man show, and there was a interesting wrestling show. Anyway, these people are just so special and connected with you in ways that are hard to describe. They were athletes, they were artists, they were personalities, but they worked the crowd, and it was an art form then that a lot of people tended to reject because they didn't really understand it as an art form. They just understand it as something that appealed in ways to some people that they didn't accept. But between some of these people that we've talked about, it just amazes me that, and it pleases me to hear some of you people talk about the same people that I'm like sticking in my mind.
You want to talk about Johnny Valentine? I was up early the other morning, and you've heard of a man named Cola Quariani?
Yes.
Cola Quariani was Rocca's manager for a while. He was a wrestler. He died in 1980. He was a chess enthusiast and a checker enthusiast. He went to play at the club, and he got accosted by 4 thugs, and they beat him up to death. That was his story. But he was in the movie The Killing, by Stanley Kubrick in 1950s. The chess was an angle to put him in the movie. Anyway, long story short, I get up the other morning, and there's a picture of Johnny Valentine from 1948, I think in Argentina, with Cola Quariani and Rocca. And they said Cola Quariani had helped Johnny Valentine get started. You see this picture of a young thin Johnny Valentine from, oh my God, almost 75 years ago. And it would be, if you talk to Greg, Evan, it might be something to ask him if his father got his start in his career in Argentina. With Cola Quariani, these things, these little tidbits come out on the internet. Now, it's unbelievable what the internet has done, teaching people and everything else. It's right at your fingertips to learn.
The internet is the best and worst of everything. The wrestling fans wear me out with, he was overrated, he was just a jobber. They don't know what they're talking about, half of them. But anyway, buddy, jump in.
That's Vince saying that?
No, the fanboys.
I'm kidding you. I know you said
2020 was obviously a really rough year for everybody. But there were some very big legendary names who passed. Who of the people who died in 2020, who's the one that meant the most to you personally of the wrestlers that passed in 2020? And there's a big list of them, you know.
Yeah, there is a big list. Throw some names out.
Well, you have everyone from, Pampero Firpo to Pat Patterson and Rocky Johnson and Animal from the Road Warriors. So the Kamala, we did a whole show on Kamala.
That was a sad situation, the Kamala situation, for sure. But he was unique, and he had a great following, and he was a main eventer. And to hear that the circumstances of his later life weren't as good as it should have been is kind of sad. Not that we want to dwell on the negative, but that's another aspect of old school wrestling. These people were on their own. They were getting paid on the number of panties that were in the seats. There was no health insurance. There was no benefits. They were paying things out of pocket. And now there are people in the on TV that are making too much money, in my opinion. But then again, the amount of money that's generated by ticket sales and everything else is such that I don't know. Maybe to some extent, in some ways, it's justified. But there isn't enough tribute paid to the people that set the foundation so that these people could be as successful as they are.
I think the one that hit me, the one that hit me the most would have had to been Animal, Joe Laurinaitis. 60 years old, same age as me. I'll be 60 in April. Came out of nowhere. I'd met him a few times, took pictures with him. He was a very nice man. Met Paul Ellering. Paul Ellering is a very intelligent man. He took to me. I took to him. We talked a lot about reading, stuff like that. But to see what happened with Joe like that, literally overnight, you say now the whole team is gone. My God! So that was one that touched me. They all touch you in a certain way. You never want to see this. 2018, we lost Johnny, then we lost Bruno 2 weeks later, and then we lost Nikolai in July. In between that, my brother-in-law died. So it was 2018 for me was a very rough year. I was probably one of the last people to talk to Johnny on the phone before he died. He called me the day before he died. We were very close. And then next night I'm sitting on my couch and this comes over the internet. And my wife is, don't kid around like that. I said, I wouldn't kid around like that. Then I notified Evan and some other people that we both know. And that was beyond words. I mean, the feelings that Evan and I have about that. And that was, he can describe it too.
Well, it's interesting you say beyond words because I'm finishing my book, and it took me almost 2 years to write up the piece on Johnny. That's how painful it was. And I was sitting with my wife watching a movie, and which for $1 million, I couldn't tell you what movie it was because right after I go online and there's a half dozen messages. What happened to Johnny? And I'm like, it was just horrible. And, for those who don't know, he was hit by a car crossing, in a street that he crossed 1 million times. It was just foggy and just a tragic accident. So, it took about 2 years to write that piece up. So,
the tribute shows you did to him for him and Nikolai was that was helpful to express the feelings and everything else. But it was, and then Bruno died 2 weeks to the day Johnny died. Bruno.
Yeah, it was.
From what I understand, even though they were estranged for many years, they didn't talk or have anything. They lived around a corner from each other in Pittsburgh. That Bruno was aware in his dying days of what had happened to Johnny. I heard that he was aware of what happened. He knew what happened to Johnny. So,
but let's hear your thoughts on Pampero Firpo, Pat Patterson, and Rocky Soulman Johnson.
Pampero hit me because I have a lot of wrestling magazines from 1975 that he appeared in. And I used to watch him from the Olympic against the Sheik and John Polis, and he had something special, so he kind of hit me. Then Alexis Smirnoff died around the same time. That kind of hit me. I used to enjoy watching him work. So Pampero had a lot of years. I think he lived to the age of 92, something like that. Yeah.
I remember the hair more than anything else with Pampero Firpo.
I remember
he looked like a wild man.
El Gorfio, the claw. El Gorfio.
Yeah. You people seem to have more personal relationships with these people than I do. I was admiring them from afar, but I also kind of came to appreciate people that have never gotten the recognition that they deserve. Believe it or not, one of my all-time favorites was Crusher Blackwell. Remember Crusher Blackwell?
He was great.
Saw him in probably the bloodiest match, one of the two bloodiest matches I've ever seen live, was him against Sheik Adnan in a cage in the Cow Palace in '84, and he snuck in his arm was all wrapped in bandages, and he had like an iron bar like underneath. He revealed it out and just whacked Jerry Blackwell about 100,000 times in the forehead.
Can you remember him doing a drop kick?
Yeah,
I saw it.
The guy was, what did he weigh, 400 pounds that he could do a drop kick?
Absolutely.
I remember being like completely mesmerized by watching this guy because, there have been some pretty athletic big guys. Big Bigelow was pretty athletic for a guy that was, 300 plus, close to 400. But Crusher Blackwell, and to me, he sort of epitomized to some extent what it was all about: the athleticism, the art, the being able to work the crowd, being able to put fannies in seats.
He knew how to move. I saw him in Nassau Coliseum, 1976. I was sitting in the front row against S.D. Jones, and he was moving faster than S.D. Jones. Dropping him there. It was.
There's a whole discussion of people like S.D. Jones and Johnny Rodz and people that were maybe jobber isn't the right word, enhancement talent as it's called today, but those were people that were so special and totally unrecognized kinds of talents.
Moose Monroe.
Joe Turco.
Well, everyone wants to be a main eventer now.
Everybody. Souza.
Everybody.
Savannah died. Savannah Souza died. That was a shock too.
He just died.
I did see that.
Yeah.
But no one's willing in today's wrestling. Nobody wants to job. Nobody wants to put anybody else over. Everybody wants to be the main eventer. Everybody wants to have their run at the title and to wear a belt for X number of weeks, until they lose it in another meaningless match. There isn't the idea that people are willing to sacrifice themselves so that somebody else could get a better looking match. And I think, don't you think that's kind of epitomizing a lot of what we see in today's wrestling?
Yeah, it's scripted. It's professional acting. These people go to a performance center. There was no performance center in those days. These guys had an inherent, and the women too, had an inherent, maybe charisma is the best word, and we've used that word a few times tonight. They were able to connect in ways and work the crowd in ways that were unbelievable. And there were people in the crowd. Evan, I'm sure maybe all of you remember the old lady who was always in the front row at Madison Square Garden, who adored Bruno, and you could watch her and be as entertained as watching some of the wrestlers. She'd be shaking her hand and screaming and yelling. Watching the crowd could be as interesting as watching the wrestlers. But that completely, aside from the pandemic, how interesting is the crowd, especially when the people that you see are overpaying for their seats and really don't understand it with the depth that we're talking about here.
Well, it was a very blue collar crowd back then. You had the Italian champion, the Puerto Rican champion, the Polish strongman, etc., so on. and they believed. The fans believed. You know, they were one step from rioting on. Well, they actually did riot back in the 50s.
Yeah, for sure. That's
Yeah,
what I
but
experienced when I had my first experience at the old Griffith Stadium. It was a near riot when
Yeah.
Johnny Valentine and Killer Kowalski are banging at each other as they're on stretchers. I mean, the crowd kind of converged, and my father said, "Let's get out of here." No, this is great. This is wonderful. So the crowd interaction now is let's buy a ticket, and it's family entertainment, and it's expensive, and the merchandise prices are through the roof, and it's become almost, it's gone from a working class crowd, as you described, Evan, to more of a upper middle class. Let's be able to spend the money on tickets and merchandise. And I mean, I can remember taking my kids, and I still have some of the merchandise around from those days.
That's what they marketed towards. That's what the market was. That's what the whole plan was, to market towards that. And then you lost your wrestling, and now product is so impersonal you can't bond to it. That's what happened.
Julian, you have a background in health. I'm going to throw this out for everybody. They're talking about this year having WrestleMania in an outdoor stadium. It's a 100,000 seat stadium, but they're going to have 30,000 people there. Is that safe?
Well, no, it's not safe, because people will not necessarily follow what they're supposed to do to keep it safe, whether it's wearing a mask or staying 6 feet apart. Just to give you some background, I started out in the hospital field and went into the senior care world, as Evan knows well. And one of the things that I enjoyed about what I did is being able to work with different kinds of people from different parts of the world with different kinds of backgrounds. In fact, every Tuesday, the supervisor of the laundry in the facility where I worked for 17 years would come up to my office, and if I had time and I wasn't on the phone, I wasn't talking to somebody, she'd want to talk about the matches. And what was wonderful about her is that she really believed that a lot of this stuff was real. She just refused to believe that, like nowadays, 99 out of 100 people believe that it's a work and it's a show and it's entertainment. She believed it, and I would enjoy it so much that she reminded me of the good old days, because there was a lot of people in the crowd in the pre-cable days that wanted to believe. And it was also, it added a dimension to their lives that was relatively innocuous but entertaining when you think about it. Cheap thrills in some respects.
Oh, buddy?
I think, what you guys are saying it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you've seen the NFL being able to have, maybe crowds of 15,000 or so, but unless everybody, gets tested before they go into the arena, or if they, we have better vaccines and we know that people have been vaccinated before they go. But otherwise, I wouldn't trust it. I have no desire to go back to seeing any live events, not until I myself have been vaccinated. And that's it.
Yeah, knowing something about infection control and communicable diseases, not that it's necessarily a fun subject to talk about. It would have to be extremely well controlled. You'd be happy. You need to take people's temperatures as they're coming in. You'd have to require the masks, and people are going to react to that. People are going to say, "I don't want to wear a mask. I'm sitting here with my wife and my friend or my brother or whatever, and what do I need a mask for?" Yeah, it's dangerous, but there's a perfect example of the importance of money versus the importance of quality of life. And therein line points out something about how the world has changed in many respects, not just in terms of professional wrestling. So, if you're so inclined, I thought it would be kind of interesting to talk about the people that sort of transitioned from old school to cable, to new school in some respects. And I look at people like Flair and Dusty as to some extent symbolic of that. People, Jimmy Snuka, Don Morocco, people that were clearly, their foundation was in old school wrestling that was not out of the performance center,
Yeah.
but people that had just unusual qualities, and they were artists. And now it's just very, very, very different.
It's vanilla today, WWE.
It's funny, Evan, I have been for many, many years watching, whether it was WOR when we lived in New York, or the UHF station that had the Spanish channel where we'd watch wrestling from the Olympics, to the days of cable. And I'm watching less wrestling now in some ways than I've watched ever in my life. I mean, admittedly, you can go onto an app like Bleacher Report, and you can get the results of SmackDown or Raw or the now AEW. I think they're even doing Ring of Honor, and they give the results there. So you read it, and if they talk about a match in a way that it's attractive, maybe you'll go and watch it. But it used to be you watched it routinely, you absorbed it, you look forward to the next show, and now maybe there's just too much of a good thing, or maybe it's not a good thing. Although I will say, what I miss more than anything else now is that I'm not paying to get New Japan, and I used to get it on AXS, because I think New Japan is really head and shoulders above everything else. But that's only
you can get New Japan World. It's great.
Yeah, you mentioned that to me, and for one reason or another, maybe I haven't, but I really enjoyed being able to watch New Japan every week.
And before the COVID lockdown, I liked the NWA Power program. One thing I liked about it was that it was only an hour, and I think that's I think you put your finger on something very important, Julian, which is that you used to have to seek out wrestling. You had to find it, and it was something precious when you would find it on TV, and here in the Bay Area, we only had like one hour of wrestling on Superstars on Saturday nights after the Wally George show would come on. And so it was appointment television. This was in the day, where my parents had a VCR, but I didn't have one. So I was never able to record anything that I wanted to record. Because Lord knows, we all had to save the tapes so that my dad could catch 20, 20, and 60 minutes. And that's all the free videotape that we had in the house. So if I ever recorded over his programs, I'd be in big trouble. So yeah, I mean, things like Saturday Night's Main Event, were things where we would gather everybody. They'd be crowded around, and it would be a party just to be able to watch something like that. It was appointment television. And now, there isn't pretty much a day that goes by during the week where you can't watch some kind of wrestling program, usually between 2 to 3 hours in length.
You pressed an interesting button. It reminds me of the days of the early pay-per-views, and my boys, needless to say, age appropriate for teenage boys to be into pro wrestling. So we get a pay-per-view, and there'd be 4 or 5 of my son's friends, and me sitting in the middle of the group, telling them about it and talking about old school. I probably bored them to tears, but it was a lot of fun, and we have fond memories of those kind of things. And I still have a whole bunch of videotapes from not just early WrestleManias, but things that I ordered from places that maybe some of you knew. Interviews with Lou Albano, Missy Hyatt. I still got all these videotapes, old All Japan and New Japan stuff. That stuff is really classic. Stan Hansen and people that really spent a lot of time in Japan, and Guru Chono, and I could go on and on and on and on. But some of these names are not necessarily familiar to people that are listening or watching. So
Scott, what about yourself?
In what regard, buddy?
Like what sort of like heavy nostalgia do you still like engage in, and what sort of thoughts were your like? How did you feel like when wrestling was appointment television? What sort of things were the things you made sure you never missed?
Well, I got married in 1986. We started to see each other in 1983. So this was around the time that Pro Wrestling USA with Vern Gagne and Bill Watts and all those guys, they tried to group together, Bob Geigel. My wife and I cut our teeth on that. We liked that. We used to get down on the local stations. And then we used to see that evolved into Saturday Night Main Event, which we enjoyed very much. So that we thought that was well done. In the mid '80s and everything else, and up until about 2000, I stopped watching it in 2000 when WCW folded. I mean, as bad as some of it got to the end, I mean, you used to like the channel surf between Raw and WCW. That was enjoyable. We used to get the old WCW on Saturday nights when Bill Watts was in charge of that. We enjoyed that. I like to watch that, so I watched the YouTube videos of these things. Watch YouTube videos of anything from championship wrestling from Florida, because Gordon Soley just mesmerizes me to this very day. And they had a talent pool there. Then I watched the old tapes of the AWA from the Midwest. I mean, you had a different flavor with all these different things. So I don't watch much of today anymore or anything else, but that's the stuff that we enjoy watching. Watching men like Harley Race, tapes of that, Killer Carl Cox, Dick Byer, the Destroyer, Ken Patero, Wahoo McDaniel, Arn Anderson, Ole Anderson, Roddy Piper, Gary Hart with Kabuki, anything from when I first got married. Every Saturday morning we got Fritz Von Erich's show, World Class. We used to get that in the 80s. Right. It was unbelievable, So
World Class. How about Southwest Championship Wrestling?
Joe Blanchard.
That was available for a while.
He was the first one to get. Yeah, Joe Blanchard got time on USA Network before Vince. He couldn't hold on to it, believe that or not. That's a true story. How about
International? There was the International Championship Wrestling. They were in and around New Jersey. They had a big show, a big outdoor show in one of the New Jersey venues.
IWA.
Yeah, right. Mil Mascaras was on one of their shows, and
that was well done. That was well done. 1975. Yeah. I got all the shows on tape. Box Baker told me. I said, "How come you only appeared on one or two shows?" I got you on. He says, No, I did. They had me billed as a champion, but Dick the Bruiser offered me more money 2 weeks later, so I went back to Indianapolis, and they had to give the North American Championship to Bulldog Brower. That's what happened there. So.
I lived in Milwaukee 30 years ago for 2.5 years, and Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher, either of them could have run for mayor, maybe even governor of Milwaukee. Their popularity was unbelievable. But talk about charisma. I mean, look at these guys. They were big guys. They were heavy. They had a little extra weight on them, but they could work a crowd. And I remember, again, 30 years ago, talking to people about pro wrestling then. I actually went to a wrestling match in Milwaukee, but by then it was Hogan. I think I took my kids to see him wrestle a Big Boss Man. That was like late 80s, something like that. But you go throughout the country, and there are a lot of these local regional heroes. In some cases, you didn't really know about them, but they were very special and had a certain appeal to the local crowd that it stayed with people for the rest of their lives.
You want to watch you want to watch special matches? Go on YouTube and watch in the 80s. I think in the 80s, 87, 88, Nick Bockwinkel against Kurt Hennig. It's unbelievable.
Yeah,
I was watching one the other night. As a 50-year-old man, the pace that Nick Bockwinkel kept up with Kurt Hennig was incredible. I couldn't believe what I was watching the other night. They had them in the Cow Palace. They had Ray Stevens involved in some of them, and everything. It was unbelievable to watch it.
In the late 80s, I had a buddy, who was still one of my wrestling buddies, who worked for Muscular Dystrophy, and they did a fundraiser and brought the AWA into Boston for this fundraiser for muscular dystrophy. So he calls me up and says, hey, how would you like to be a volunteer for muscular dystrophy? I said, well, okay, tell me all about it. He says, well, we're going to do a wrestling match. And of course, my ears went up and I was all excited. And he put me in charge of ringside security, which was kind of a joke. But I did get to meet Sergeant Slaughter. I got to meet Larry Sharp. I got to meet the Road Warriors. They were just, really beginning to become as popular as they were. I think Rick Martel was the was the champion at the time. So the big match was Sergeant Slaughter against Boris Zukov. And Larry Sharp was Boris Zukov's manager. After the matches, they had a dinner for the volunteers and the wrestlers. So, of course, I'm in my glory. I'm wanting to talk to anyone and everybody. And the guy who I spent the most time talking to was Larry Zbyszko, who was about my height. I'm about 5'10". Of course, he was a lot bigger. I don't know. I don't think he was much more than 210. But, boy, he was like a walking adrenal gland. The guy just couldn't stop talking, except when I asked him about how he got paid and how he was able to sustain himself by being on the road and so forth. That, all of a sudden, he kind of clammed up. He didn't want to talk about that. But it was a very fun night, an interesting night. But it was special because the AWA had come to the Boston area. The program was televised locally. Philip Kowalski did color with one of the local sportscasters. So, of course, I had to go up and chat with Philip Kowalski. I got his autograph. We talked about the match that I alluded to you before with Johnny Valentine. So it was really kind of a fun, interesting time and one of the more interesting wrestling experiences I had that the AWA came here.
Scott, I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about your artwork and explain a little bit more about what you've done art-wise with wrestlers.
Well, I started painting oil paintings in 1995. I used to watch Bob Ross on TV on Channel 13. You know who that is?
Yeah, oh yeah, the happy little trees.
Yeah, and he developed his own technique, wet on wet. So I started with that. Now I've been a house painter for 40 years, so I've always worked with brushes and knives in my hands. So it came easy for me. After watching his show, I started with that. Started giving some of them away. I was friends with a man named Harold Weisberg. You can look him up online. He was one of the first generation critics of the Warren Commission. And I gave my artwork, some of my artwork to him, and I started doing more artwork. And then as time progressed, I started getting my artwork to the wrestlers. Like Bruno got one of my paintings. Baron von Raschke got one of my paintings. I did a nice cabin scene for both of them. Jimmy Valiant got a couple of my paintings. Matter of fact, I promised Jimmy Valiant I got to paint a portrait of him. I just got I had contact with him after a few years. He doesn't forget you over the years, who you are, or the memories, or anything else. So I got a big canvas. I got to do a portrait of him. I did a dog for Ken Patera. He loves dogs. Buddy Colt. You remember Buddy Colt?
Yeah, blonde hair.
I did 3 paintings for Buddy Colt of his dogs. Who else?
If you get really bored during the pandemic, you can do one of me and Evan.
Yeah,
I'll try.
Right.
I'll try something.
That'll go right to the Museum of Modern Art.
I got to do Jimmy Valiant first. I promised Jimmy Valiant last August I would do a portrait of him. He's a lovely man too, Jimmy. Lovely. I did Nikolai. Did one of Nikolai for Nikolai. I did a portrait of him. I did a portrait of superstar Billy Graham. He's got that. I did of him. I did Jonathan Banks, the actor from Breaking Bad. He's got that. He signed a photo for me. Scott, thanks for the painting. So
I went to high school with him.
With who?
Jonathan Banks.
That's nice. He's very good actor.
No kidding. Yeah.
No, I believe you. In Washington.
In Washington? Yeah, just outside of Washington. It was a high school in Silver Spring, Maryland. And what's funny is that I remember sitting with him, and I'm not making this up. And I remember him saying to me, I want to be an actor someday. And I said, yeah, and I want to be a fireman or whatever. I mean, it was like, guys sitting around talking about whatever that we were talking about. Well, sure enough, look at the roles that he's had, Breaking Bad, and he was in Beverly Hills.
Wise Guy.
he played similar characters. You know, he's always a badass, we have periodic informal reunions, and one of these days we're hoping he's going to either show up or zoom in or whatever.
Tell him you talked to the guy that did his portrait for him. I did his portrait for him.
In fact, I still keep in touch with one of his friends, and I will mention that. In fact, that guy could be watching for all I know, or listening, or both.
I did the portrait. Then before I sent it out, I wrote on the top, Saul Goodman sent me. That was his famous line when he got into the show. Saul Goodman sent me, so I sent it to him, and his manager called me. We got home. We had a blizzard. That was the blizzard of 2018. He said, "Did you call me last week?" I said, "Yeah. I'm trying to make sure I get this painting to Jonathan Banks." And he said, "I'm sure he got it." Then that day, the autographed photos a day later came in the mail. He signed 2 photographs. One said thanks for the painting, and the other one said to Scott. So I just fell in love with the character of Mike. You know, that he portrayed. So.
And Scott, if
fights.
people wanted to see your artwork online, is there a way that people could check out your art?
Just go on my Facebook page, Scott Wilson.
There's 10,000 Scott Wilsons in America. How are they going to find that?
You got to look for the beard.
Okay.
That's that right now. Everybody's telling me make a web page. So maybe I will one day. So I probably should. Or get a manager or something like that, you know. But when I do a painting or a drawing, I put it on my Facebook page so people can see it, get it exposure that way. So maybe this year I'll make a page. Who knows?
All right.
And Julian, how would people get in touch with you if they're interested in following up with you after watching this show?
Email. I've got my old email, my AOL, and my new email, my Gmail. Let me give you my Gmail. JulianGrich@gmail.com, JulianGrich@gmail.com. And I'll talk to people about wrestling. I'll talk to people about rhythm and blues, one of Evan's and my favorite subject. And I like to think of myself as having a variety of interest and some diverse friends and so forth. So I'm always interested in meeting new people and learning about stuff that in some cases I don't know much about. I mean, I'm in the enviable position of being semi-retired, but I'm still very active in my field. But I so enjoy being able to do something like this, pursuing something that was kind of a passion and still is, although it's harder to be passionate towards pro wrestling in these days without going back to the days where you really got something out of being passionate.
There you go.
Well, we're right up at the end of the hour. It's always been so fast. It seems like you get started, and before you know it, we've filled in the whole hour of wrestling talk. But you guys have been really wonderful guests. We'd love to have you again, especially if you're in the position of promoting something, or you get some big new paintings done or anything like that. Love to see what Johnny Valiant's painting eventually looks like, and it's really great to have you guys on the show. Is there any last words you'd like to impart to our viewing audience tonight?
I wanted to thank you fine gentlemen for having me on. I know Evan a long time, 20 years now. We love each other through thick and thin and everything else. And it was an honor to talk to you fine gentlemen and share these fond memories. And I wish Evan a world of good with this new book that he has coming out. He blessed me with the opportunity to write either a foreword or something he wanted to add to the book. And what I had written came from the heart. So I hope everybody sees it, and I hope he has a lot of success with it. And
Julian has a piece of that too.
Yeah, I am not just a member, but I'm an officer in Evan's fan club. We go back to the Wrestling Then and Now days, and I actually still have some of the material. I think, Evan, not too long ago, I took a picture of some of the stuff that I pulled out of a file. I enjoy being able to look at that stuff. I cherish our relationship. I have a great admiration for Evan, not just because of his involvement in the world of pro wrestling and music and pop culture and music, but Evan is a class guy and has a great network of people that care about him and people that he has shown that he's a real humanist.
He's
Buddy,
got
I
a good
don't know
heart.
you that
He's
well.
got a good heart. He cares
Yeah.
deeply about people.
I feel the same way about you guys. I appreciate it. I'm blushing.
Well, we can't let's end this on an absolutely positive note so nothing can spoil any of this perfect mood that we're all in right now.
Stay safe,
Right.
fellas. Stay
and
safe.
and
stay
really
healthy.
appreciate
Stay
meeting you guys
healthy.
tonight.
Yeah.
And we'd love to have you back on the show again in the near future.
And Scott,
Anytime.
check your messages, Scott. I got something important to send you.
Okay. All
And
right.
we could always have a theme like greatest tag teams of all time. Or
I want to talk
best
about Johnny
jobbers.
Powers next time I'm on.
Oh, I remember Johnny.
Johnny
Well, I
Powers,
like
one of
to
my
hear
all-time
that there
favorites.
will be a next time.
Oh, my
So
God.
All right.
that's always a big plus.
Very
Be
All
good.
safe,
right.
fellas.
Anyway,
Stay safe.
everyone, it's good evening, and we'll see
Thank
everyone
you,
next
thank
week.
you.
Thank you for being on our show tonight.
Bye,
All right.
fellas.
All right.
Be
Thanks,
well.
guys. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Be
Good
good.
night.
Good night.